You're live. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here and following this new event of Digital Swamp, the expanded public program of School of Waters. I'm Simone Frangi. I'm one of the 9 curators of School of Waters. And the event of tonight, which is titled Practising from Afar, Engage with Libyan History, features artists Alessandra Ferrini and Taufik Nas, and is hosted by Gasworks London. We have here Sabel Gambaldon, curator at Gasworks, who will be moderating this conversation. I would just wanted to highlight the fact that Alessandra Serini participation to the Biennale is made possible by GAI, Giovani Artisti Italiani, and that Taufik's participation to the Biennale is made possible thanks to UK Young Artists. We have here with us Michelle Bowen from UK Young Artists. So I would just ask maybe Michelle to say a few words about the organization and how you work and how actually you support and engage with the artists.
Wonderful, thank you. That's really nice, and it's so nice to be invited to this conversation, so I appreciate that. Yes, hello everyone, I'm Michelle Bone, I'm Director of UK New Artists. UK New Artists is a national organisation based across the UK, supporting new artists in the first 10 years of their practice. We are also an organisation which has been a partner with BJCEM, who are one of the key organisers of the School of Waters. We sit on the board of directors and kind of inform the work that they do. And a very key part of that is ensuring that artists based in the UK have access to the opportunities and networks right across Europe and right across the agencies who are also other members. So that's why we're delighted to be able to support Taufik's presentation at the School of Waters and participation, and we do that through a number of ways, and hopefully that will be an ongoing relationship. And the other artist, Maeve Brennan, who is also a UK artist representing at the School of Waters this year. So yeah, it's just you know, we believe in intercultural dialogue, we believe in the power of international relationships, and we believe that young and new artists, so you don't have to be young anymore, that new artists should have an open access to that and a dialogue and an opportunity to experience that. So, and I think there'll be a very interesting conversation today, and I'm looking forward to going out, God willing, to the event in July and seeing all Simone and Alessandro's hard work and all the other curatorial team. It's been looking amazing on social media, so congratulations.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you also for introducing this talk in such a way, because I think the importance of intercultural dialogue that also BJCM and UK New Artists are promoting is actually at the core of the conversation of tonight. I just wanted to say a few words about the meaning of having this conversation tonight for us. So as I said before, there is something very interesting about this relationship between School of Waters and Gasworks, and Sabel will also tell us why. Not only because we are supporting a lot of artists that we like Taufik and Alessandra, but also because the institution's philosophy is pretty much close actually in using art and the platform that art actually can provide in order to engage in-depth dialogue around colonial history and neo-colonialism. So as you saw from the title, the talk of tonight is around actually practicing from afar from Libya and engaging with Libyan history from different points of view. We have Alessandra Ferrini, who is an Italian London-based artist who is engaging actually with the Libyan history based also on her interrogations about critical whiteness and also about positionality, and actually questioning Italian colonialism and the heritage of Italian colonialism in the wide gazes that actually are looking at the Mediterranean. And also we have Taufik here with us, who is engaging with Libyan history, always from afar, but through actually a more family history, a more intimate history, and how actually the history of the history of Libya and also about the political system of Libya are arriving to him through a sort of more intimate routes. I say that this talk is pretty much important for us because, as you can read in the statement of School of Waters, the aim of the Biennale is to defamiliarize with stereotypes and geographical stereotypes, and especially to Eurocentric interpretation of the Mediterranean. And in this task, actually, there is an important work that we have been doing around Mediterraneanism. This is a very important notion for us because not only we tend actually to detach ourselves to Eurocentric interpretation of the Mediterranean, but also with meridionalist rhetorics on this idea of a syncretic and pacified and unified Mediterranean. For us, it's really dangerous actually to look at the Mediterranean in such a way because there is a dangerous flirtation with form of evacuation of complexity of the Mediterranean, and especially of evacuation of the complexity of the ecologies of the Mediterranean, which are turbulent by definition, and they actually are based on an infrastructure of genocidal routes impressed in Mediterranean waters by colonialisms at plural and neocolonialisms. So for us, it's really important also to detach from description of an essentialist and domesticated sea, instead of looking at the Mediterranean, as Gaia Giuliani says, as a space of memories, violence, and where protest, resistance, and conflict converge. So it's also very important for us to look back at colonial histories and how colonial histories still inform our present. So not to calm down the agitated water of Mediterranean, but actually try to look into it and try to see how colonialism operated not only on an horizontal way, but also on a vertical way in these waters. So we are pretty much interested also in highlighting histories of resistance and rebellion in the Mediterranean, and especially of anti-colonial struggle. So this is a very important talk for us because it marks really a very nuanced understanding of the Mediterranean, and also a sort of important aspect of the work that we have been trying to do as a temporary school in San Marino. So without further ado, I would leave the floor to Sabel, Alessandra, and Taufik. Again, thanking Sabel for accepting this to be the moderator of this conversation and engaging also with this topic, which is very complex. And so I will leave you the floor. I will fade out, and I will thank you so much for this, for your contribution tonight.
Thanks so much, Simone Frangi, for the amazing invitation. I'm really, really happy that the School of Waters got in touch with Gasworks and Tofik and Alessandra to host this event and co-host it from Gasworks. As Simone was saying, it's an invitation that makes a lot of sense from a Gasworks perspective for us, because it's definitely an organization. The School of Waters feels very much aligned and like-minded to kind of the principles that drive also Gasworks programs and ethos since the 90s. And my name is Sabel Gabaldon. I'm the curator at Gasworks. And the reason, the way I got to know Tofik very recently is because Tofik was a resident at Gasworks just from January to April, so very, very recently, as part of our residencies program. Usually at Gasworks, we host a program of 16 international residencies every year. And it's mostly artists coming from all around the world, really, like especially regions from Latin America, African continent, Southeast Asia. Some of our residencies are also from artists based in Europe. And throughout this very, very difficult COVID year, obviously, most of our international residencies were put on standby for obvious reasons due to kind of the cancellation of international travel and so forth. And as a way to, I guess, make ourselves useful as an organization and keep supporting artists nearby, we basically decided to allocate our international residency studios for studio-based, London-based residencies, rent-free. And Tofik was one of the selected artists for the second iteration of this kind of London-based residencies program. And we had like the enormous privilege of having Tofik alongside 3 more artists, Henry Bradley, Jamila Prowse, and Antonia Laxem, using our studios for a period of about 2 months, if I'm not wrong. It was a very interesting period, very challenging for all of us, I guess, not just at Gasworks. In our case, it meant that we were less present in the building due to kind of self-isolation and distancing, as we, in relation to kind of how we usually occupy that space, which means that a lot of the support that we could provide to Tofik and other artists was online. but Tawfiq was physically at the building producing the research and work that now is exhibited as part of the School of Waters. And we had like the kind of a really enriching experience of being able to kind of chat online periodically and exchange knowledge. And I'm sure now that the UK seems in a kind of cautiously optimistic moment of reopening, we'll have the opportunity to kind of keep progressing in the dialogue with Tawfiq and with Alessandra, with whom I just had the pleasure to meet very recently through the amazing School of Waters program and Simone's invitation. And as Simone was just saying, the other reason why Gasworks is co-hosting this event is because, similar to the School of Waters, we have a program that since the 90s has engaged periodically with kind of colonial and post-colonial histories. That's very much at the core of what we do. And a lot of the artist commissions that we've been kind of putting forward for many years have gone in that direction. Just an example of that is the exhibition with which we've just reopened the building this week by Mercedes Spilicueta, who is an artist that, not so unlike Alessandra or Tawfiq, looks at colonial histories with a very research-based perspective, but at the same time adds a strong speculative layer to that research, bringing it into a space which shares questions with personal histories, fiction, speculation, and so forth. And I think something that it's pretty kind of evident from the conversations we've been having already with Tawfiq and Alessandra is that these very heavy subjects around colonial histories can be tackled in wildly different ways. And I think Alessandra's and Tawfiq's practices are example of how, on the one hand, there's so many crisscrosses in common ground in terms of the kind of very complex and convoluted kind of political histories and questions around the politics of memory that your works are touching upon, but at the same time, the very different, both subjective kind of standpoints and positioning, and also the way in which artistically you deal with those histories and primary research in a very, very differentiated way. So I think as a starting point, what I would like to do is to ask both of you, Alessandra and Tawfiq, if you would like to introduce a little bit your practice, and also the question of what's the role that Libyan histories play in your life and your work, and how did you encounter kind of Libyan histories as artists? And I don't know if any of you wants to start. Maybe I would pass the mic to Alessandra or Tawfiq, whoever. Alessandra, Tawfiq? Yeah.
I can go if you want, up to you. Should I go for it?
Please do.
Okay, I will. So thank you so much, Samuel, for this wonderful introduction and framing the conversation and our approaches, to fix and my approach, and in relation as well to the program at Gasworks. And thanks, Simone, as well for the invitation, for again the introduction to School of Waters and how this talk will relate to that. And thanks to all the 9 curators, actually, that curate School of Waters, for their hard work. And it's really amazing for me to be here in conversation with Tawfiq. We've had conversations before, and I think it's great to have the opportunity to open up this conversation to a public, to other voices, to Sabel's input, and hopefully we'll have questions as well. So yes, as it was already mentioned, I'm Italian. I grew up in Italy. I've then moved to the UK, London, almost 20 years ago, which is where I studied. So I always describe my interventions within the Italian context as an insider and an outsider at the same time. Because my way of seeing, the tools I use in my work are very much come from the UK and the kind of visual culture studies that I underwent here. But of course, it comes also from first-hand experience of Italy, and especially my work in a way really started from a realization and a way to intervene in the lack of the education system in Italy in relations to colonial history. Because for me, all this work I've been doing, all the research around the politics of memory in relation to Italian colonial history, which just started in around 2014, essentially, come from an encounter actually with Ahmed, a Libyan friend, who we kind of shared an accommodation kind of space. So, and daily he reminded me of sort of links and connections between the history of, you know, Libya and Italy, even just in the language. And I was, it was shocking to me to realize that I knew nothing about it, and that up until that point, I never asked myself those kind of questions because I didn't actually know. I wasn't taught that there was that kind of connection. And through Ahmed and through the things, you know, exposed me to, and through the fact that he gifted me with a film, a DVD of Lion of the Desert, which is a film that actually it's also sparked the research for the film that I have in the show School of Water, which is called Sight Unseen, that my background is actually a screenshot from that. Which is a film that was made by Mustafa Akkad, US Syrian director, funded by Gaddafi regime. But it's an important movie because it really quite accurately actually described the brutality of the Italian occupation of Libya and the repression of the anti-colonial movement in the 20s, 30s, and that actually led to genocide. So this film was banned in Italy, still banned in Italy, and a film that I made starting from this kind of thinking around this film and why it's banned today in Italy led to finding out more about images of this period. That's, you know, the same similar kind of story that is explored by the film, which is a story of Omar al-Mukhtar, the leader of the anti-colonial resistance at the time, that are in Rome and at the moment cannot be published because of a sort of legal limbo. So the film sort of really think about this kind of ongoing censorship that is still there, and how, you know, how the brutality of the fascist colonial occupation was then erased and concealed, and is still, for many extents actually, still erased and concealed. So this is just to give I don't want to take too much time, but just to say about my, something I thought was very important for me to say before we delve into further conversation, is that this conversation we are having is from afar, and obviously by being from afar is not including direct conversation with people who are directly affected by these, who are, you know, Libyan practitioners and scholars. And I would like to particularly point out the amazing work that the Warak Foundation and Teo Barnosa are doing in Tripoli, and to just, you know, point out the incredible work and reflections that are out there. And yeah, so I just thought that, you know, to mention this, and to mention the fact that by doing the work I do and focusing on Italian history, and you know, kind of reflecting on Libyan history through an Italian point of view, because what I'm trying to do with the work is very much deconstructing a way of seeing and thinking that, you know, was ingrained in me in first place, and is still very much hasn't been really challenged in Italy yet. That also obviously creates a lot of problems in the way the Libyan people's experience keeps being marginalized as well. And so these are some of the questions that I'm engaging with. I'm still, you know, trying to understand how doing one work, you know, that, you know, shouldn't have an impact on that, and how do you navigate and negotiate that position from from my own positioning and the place I am, and the kind of space I feel and I can inhabit, and the kind of conversation I feel I can develop through my work. So I think I'm gonna stop there.
I'll interject very briefly before Taufik's presentation, just to point out also, because you were mentioning Omar al-Mukhtar, and if I'm not wrong, your moving image work around Omar al-Mukhtar is the piece of work that is also exhibited at the Mediterranean and Team Biennale, isn't it? Which might be interesting for our viewers today. Which is also video work that I was kind of very, Alessandra had kind of the kindness of sharing a few links with me for the preparation of this talk. And something that I was kind of very drawn into is this idea of kind of denying to the viewers the possibility of seeing and playing around with the viewer's voyeuristic drive, which kind of made me think of like something that immediately came to mind, even if it's not a political kind of documentary aesthetics film, is something like Buñuel's El, which I think was translated to English as this strange passion where the camera is following the two characters, and as they enter into a bedroom, the door closes and kind of blocks the visibility from the camera, and that kind of exercise of denying visibility to the viewer is something that in your practice seems very, very tied to questions of historical responsibility and who has the right to tell and the right to see, which is something I'm sure we'll be touching upon in a minute, also in discussion with Tawfiq. And I don't know, do you want Tawfiq to maybe tell us just a little bit about your practice and your relationship with Libya as well?
Yeah, of course. Again, I think just jumping off the back of what Alessandra said, just a big thanks to obviously Sibel, Simone, Michelle, and all the creators at School of Waters. It's been a pleasure making work with them in mind. And yeah, I guess with my practice, the main kind of bulk, or I guess the nucleus of what I'm interested in is the ability to be in the same vicinity of a moment in time and being able to sustain it and trying to understand what that's like, or trying to understand the mechanics of sustaining a moment, whether that's a piece of history, a personal history, or even just a fictional moment. I'm kind of interested in how that can be renegotiated in different contexts. And I think with the work for the School of Waters, which is a mixed media sculptural piece, the kind of main interest was this kind of witness complex. And I was really interested in the role of the witness in the fictional landscape, or the role of the witness in this renegotiated state that kind of changes through the retellings of history. What happens to that kind of core source of information? So yeah, I guess I work through mostly sculpture and writing, and with the opportunity of the Gasworks residency, I was able to really dig deep into the writing that I was doing since graduating, and was able to really flesh out some ideas that I kind of would constantly think about in the ideas of retelling history. And the history that I'm particularly interested in is the Great Man-Made River, which is this kind of historical construction that was found in the 50s and later began construction in the 80s, which was, I guess, a very short rundown of that history. Is a big mass of fossil water was found in the desert in the 50s while searching for oil. And then it was then later utilized to become this system that would distribute water across Libya and then furthermore the whole of Africa. And I guess within that, there's some personal family ties within that piece of history that I was aware of, I guess, growing up. And I think going through my research and kind of coming across it through Google Images and working backwards and trying to understand this piece of history and how this piece of history is something that's really in a perpetual motion of reenactments throughout history, I find. Or, it's seeing a piece of history as material and kind of trying to observe the links that could be found in other material matter, whether it's fictional, physical, or whatnot. So yeah, and I guess my relationship with Libyan history is that I've always observed Libyan history through sources that aren't really of my own. I don't really have any I don't have any primary accounts of Libya as a place or as a culture, but everything I have has been fed through these kind of external elements, usually my mum, who's kind of passed on these ideologies and these kind of systems in a way. And I guess for someone that's kind of curious to know how, those things will exist in the future and how that kind of source of knowledge can be sustained, I think the work is really just attempts to isolate those moments and ideas of knowledge and to kind of make use of them in a way. Yeah.
I think something worth telling also the audience, especially for those who might be kind of listening or watching and are not kind of familiar with Tawfiq's practice, is how a lot of the work you've been producing recently has at least from my perspective, has this kind of, it has the feel of incredibly kind of intendedly cryptic and enigmatic infographics and kind of slices of information that have almost the quality of hieroglyphs somehow. So something that is quite interesting, I think, is that in a stark contrast with the sort of tone and attitude and language that you would expect from, say, testimonial or witnessing or kind of reports in relation to kind of conflictual histories of colonial relationships and so forth. In the case of your work, in the case of Tawfiq's work, this is kind of distilled into something that is almost kind of intendedly resisting interpretation. It kind of poses itself as a challenge to the viewer, or that's the way I perceive it, at least. I don't know if you wish to expand on that. But something else that came up in relation to this in prior conversations was, and I was very interested in kind of Tawfiq expanding on that and asking him about it. This idea of a sense of suspicion or a sense of distance around kind of tones that demand a strong emotional response, and rather playing with kind of artistic tropes and narrative devices in the case of Tawfiq's practices, that to me, they seem to kind of affirm some sort of lightness and the necessity of some sort of lightness. And also in previous conversation, you were, Tawfiq, kind of pointing up that somehow that in your mind relates to an idea of intellectual curiosity and inciting curiosity. So I would like to ask you about that, about if you would like to expand around what's driving you to kind of this very, very sophisticated, layered approach to your kind of primary materials, which are very often dealt with in a more documentary manner.
I mean, I think I think usually it really comes down to just the interest that I have in other things. Like, you know, I think I'm also the type of person that I really do enjoy like signs, and I enjoy very dense ideas that can be really put down into like a 2D image, like whether it's a stop sign or whatever. I think also because I think just signs are like symbols, symbols I think are hollow, and I think they only make sense when they're put in their kind of correct, respected situations. And you know, like I think a stop sign in a busy road makes sense, but a stop sign in like a desert makes no sense. And I'm interested in that exchange on how can a symbol that's usually most likely understood, like a smiley face, for example, it's understood, I guess, kind of globally. I'm interested to know what happens to that, or what happens in that exchange when that kind of gets a bit shifted, but not in like a super like on the nose type of way. I think it's more a bit, there's a bit more of a science to it in a way of thinking through symbology and visual stimulants. I think that's maybe where that suspicion comes in. I feel like people are familiar with it. I think upon observation, people understand certain elements of the work that I produce, whether it's the letters used, the wording used, or even like sculpturally, you know, seeing a flower everyone can understand what a flower is, but I guess in the context of the work, it becomes a bit jarring maybe. And, you know, I think for me, there's a reason behind it, and it's really to kind of highlight that aspects of history, you know, kind of relay themselves in throughout different life stages, whether it's past, present, or even in the future. I think those elements of history kind of are continuous in, I guess, like the energy lines of someone or someone's surroundings. So I think that maybe is like the way I work. It's because I think at times people assume that I'm trying to just be like the smart one in the room, when half the time it's that I'm also in the same boat of I'm not really sure what these placements mean or what the objects have to do with anything. I think there's just something that clicks, and I'm interested in knowing what happens. And I guess like what we're doing now is probably like the part that I always work towards, which is discourse and kind of understanding what everyone's thinking, so then I can also make my own judgments in a way.
This, what you were just saying, makes me think of something that actually kind of will lead me into Alessandra again, and a question to her, which is how very often we assume, and I think that's something that is kind of very prominent in the contemporary art world in relation to questions of heritage and identity. We very often assume that having like personal ties or family histories in relation to whatever subject matter, region, field of knowledge, whatever, gives you kind of some sort of privileged standpoint, when often being surrounded in something doesn't kind of give you kind of epistemological privilege, but just makes you part of that kind of confusion, as you were saying, which is something that I always found very, very, very interesting in the case of documentary photographers like Susan Meiselas, which somehow she always defied the idea of the photographer who is able to tell a story with the pictures, and rather embrace the idea of photographies that convey the sense of chaos and confusion of something that defies interpretation. So if you see Susan Meiselas' reportage of the Nicaragua conflict, for example, you never know which of the sides you're looking at, who is with who, what's actually going on in the image. They're images that somehow convey that sense of being very present and wildly confused about what's actually happening in the middle of an historical event. And somehow I think that something that makes this kind of event particularly interesting to me is that there's like two artistic perspectives on a single post-colonial history. One of which, your case, Tawfiq, by an artist who has family ties with the region and with that history, but at the same time, a very, as we were saying, a very kind of peripheral approach to that history, and almost like playing around with narrative devices in a sort of MacGuffin sort of way, almost like a magician that takes a rabbit into the hat and makes it disappear. And suddenly you think that you are looking at a work by Tawfiq Nas that tells you about the Great Maimen River, but actually it's about something else, which is very difficult to point down. In the case of Alessandra, it's very interesting as well, even though very different in terms of positioning. To me, it feels like we're talking about an artist that doesn't have like direct ties to Libya, but at the same time realizes that maybe the best way to interrogate Italian history and Italian national construction is through engaging with and questioning the histories of colonial occupation of Italy, and therefore the history of Libya. So actually, again, doing a very interesting detour in which in your work, I think, Alessandra, we kind of discover something about Italian histories rather than Libyan ones through that kind of navigation. I wanted to ask you if you would like to expand about that, and also in relation to something that I was kind of super interested when you mentioned the other day, which is the PhD research and the artistic research that you are developing in relation to Gaddafi's encounter with Berlusconi, which seems like an encounter that again expresses the duality, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my work tend to go, I mean, it is very historiographical in a way, but always try to link this moment in history to the present. And I think the PhD research particularly doing that because it's about a much more recent event, but it's used as a starting point to go back in history again and cover the kind of 100 years and more relation between Italy and Libya. So my PhD research is titled Gaddafi in Rome and Dissected a Neo-Colonial Spectacle. So it's very much about bringing out the continuities in colonial politics, really, between Italy and Libya. So how Italy, through neo-colonial and new imperialist kind of policies and politics. So the film is about the Treaty of Friendship, Partnership and Cooperation between Libya and Italy was signed in 2008, 2009. And in 2009, to celebrate this, Gaddafi actually went to Italy for the very first time, to Rome. And the film follows these 3 days through a live news updates feed from a newspaper in Italy. So through very, very detailed, minute kind of reporting of the event, but in very condensed form, which is sort of text-based. It was the beginning, you know, that they weren't using really Twitter or anything like that. It's a bit like a breaking news format. It's quite hybrid because they didn't really use it out much after that in that way. And because it was such an exceptional hyper production of news, they actually archived it so that the whole film follows these 3 days, but then trying to unpack these very condensed and distilled pieces of news to try and create some and give some context to understand what is actually being discussed and how the present, the time present political dealings actually come from a very long lineage, but also how they affect now, what's the afterlife as well. So the kind of politics that we're seeing now, and to me is always very important to to make a point of how Italian imperialism has had an impact globally, and how, because it's often seen as something very marginal because of the scale in relation to other, European imperial powers, but how actually, and this is an excuse that is used in Italy to not think about it, not, think that this is something actually important and actually so that just shaped national identity and politics in such a profound way, and is often put in the same box with fascism, and with that excuse again not looked at, while actually Italy starts get unified in 1861 and already has imperialist aspiration, and right away joins the scramble for Africa. So that's decades before fascism comes to power. With fascism we have an acceleration and of brutality, really, and the development of technologies of genocide that then will actually be has a recent book by Ali Ahmida proves will actually inspire and be used by Nazi Germany to develop their technologies of genocide and the Holocaust. So for me, it's always important to make those links, even in relation on how the occupation of Libya, for instance, accelerated the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire and led to the destabilization that led to the First World War, or how the Italian occupation of Abyssinia, of Ethiopia in 1935-36 actually created domino effects that led to the Second World War. And so yes, I'm looking at these geographies from a very Eurocentric perspective, but it is for me a way to make sense of historical responsibility, I would say, and also making more complex, creating complexities in understanding what Italianness means, or Mediterranean identities. Is often something that at the moment a lot of Italians tend to use as a almost a whitewashing. Almost a way to erase the whiteness, claiming a different kind of hybrid identity, but actually our national identity is being built very much on creating that color line and unleashing the violence, and then how, and I will finish, talk a lot, but how for instance, the meeting between Berlusconi and Gaddafi that give way starts the the attitude of the European Union towards migration and then necropolitics in the Mediterranean by starting the outsourcing of border control to neighboring countries. In this case, the detention center that were built in Libya, the pushback of migrants. And just this week, yesterday and the day before, we've had the European Union representative had talks in Tunisia to force the same kind of deal. And then of course we've seen the same kind of deal with Turkey, and we've seen it in Spain as well, in Morocco. But this was very much started by this meeting between Berlusconi and Gaddafi, and that was justified through colonial reparations. So in exchange of colonial reparations, Italy then was able to sort of somehow reclaim some sort of sovereignty over Libya in terms of border extending borders to Libya and the control of borders through there. So yeah, so I think for me it's always interesting, yes, to think about what it means as an Italian person, to think about the legacy and create awareness of that, to understand what, by not looking at that, the kind of experiences that get negated, but also how this impact much more global and at least European, and relations between Europe and neighboring countries and continents, and those kind of relations and politics now.
No, your intervention is great because it brings us back to what Simone was saying at the beginning in his introduction of the Mediterranean as a contested space, but also as a space in which it's very obvious how those colonial histories, which sometimes may seem to some as very kind of distant in time or geographically, depending on the case, are actually very, very directly tied and weaved together with kind of current necropolitics in the Mediterranean and Fortress Europe, and the way, especially for countries that are kind of in the interface or the border, such as the case of kind of Italy or Spain, that are kind of an interface between the African continent and Europe, they very much define national identity and construction. I was wondering though, because on the one hand, there's like, to me at least, there's like a kind of very obvious like rationale driving your work. It makes a lot of sense for an Italian artist to interrogate colonial and post-colonial histories of regions and countries like Libya as a way to kind of look inwards as well and learn about one's own kind of colonial history and construction. But at the same time, there's like a significant set of, I guess, difficulties in terms of, from the most basic, such as kind of access to certain archives, to language about kind of questions, to I'm sure there's like a sense of distance and gap in between your experience and the histories you're researching. And I was wondering if you would like to expand on how you deal with those as an artist, basically. What's your approach to those?
I mean, I think that is the most complex, perhaps, thing for me, issue, and things that I constantly negotiate and trying to, learn and understand how it can be, how to position myself really, and the kind of what the ethics there. And so I think often for me it's very important to be very clear in where my boundaries are and when I look at something. So, come back from a very somehow Italian, like making a point about something that has to do with Italian politics of memory always, rather than, trying to, I'm not trying to give a voice or speaking in place of, but actually trying to be quite precise in the way I say, okay, I set those boundaries, and I understand, and I try to not, and I try to just sort of, sorry, I'm getting lost in my own words. But I think, again, yes, it's a way of, I think it's a constant discovery. And I think for Libya, in working on Libya with a PhD as well, and not, which entails as well a very long process and much deeper for certain extents than other projects I developed before, obviously has posed to me a lot of challenges, a lot of questions that I'm still trying to understand and resolve. For instance, even just by looking at Gaddafi, so many other problems, ethical issues opens up in a way that as well, by talking about Gaddafi, once again, we are negating, the experience of Libyan people to really come through, because for decades, he has completely sort of overshadowed the experience of Libyans, sort of representing them almost. And this is some, kind of warning that some Libyan scholars sort of have been pointing out. And also at the same time, how to, for instance, working around Omar al-Mukhtar, I started from there because it was my kind of point of entry. But then, the more you research, the more also you realize that, there's Gaddafi himself also has placed a great lot of a lot of attention on this, and kind of exploited his legacy. And so how by doing that and not going deeper and not thinking about other figures, for instance, that were marginalized in the first place by Gaddafi, and just sort of recreating the same, replacing attention on the same kind of figures that were allowed to be discussed during the regime, then again you're participating to something that perhaps is not that ethical, and that there's this need to go further, and then need to be more aware of what you're doing with your work, and that how, like I was saying before, by trying to speak about something that I feel I can speak about because it's my, it's my position and my heritage. Perhaps, you contribute in creating other shadows, putting other shadows on other experiences once again. And so I think for me, it's an ongoing kind of learning curve. And yeah, I think, and a lot of this is through conversations and, confronting myself with other people's experiences, and doing a lot of self-reflexive work that comes out a lot generally in the films. Perhaps not in Sight Unseen is slightly different work, but in my film about Gaddafi and Berlusconi is very much about that, is making it clear that this is done through my own eyes, my own limits, my own vision, and that kind of process of try to undo and relearn and question how I see.
Kind of addressing a very similar question now to Tawfiq. Something that I was mentioning earlier is how like it became kind of obvious in our previous conversations that there's like a very interesting sense of inversion in the way kind of you approach the distance. And in the case of Alessandra, there's obviously like a distance in experience, in kind of immediately lived experience in relation to kind of Libyan histories, and a question about how to breach that, and what does it mean to breach it, and what are the risks and the historical responsibility, and all the questions we're just addressing. In the case of your practice topic, there's something really interesting happening there, which again seems kind of difficult to pin down, and I would like to ask you about it, in which on the one hand, there's elements of Libyan history that very much connect to kind of your own family histories and should belong or belong in part to the realm of intimacy, personal histories, testimonial, whatever is the word you may choose for that. But in your practice, somehow you abstract them to the point that, as I was saying earlier, they often seem like kind of fragments or hieroglyphs from something you found from kind of, who knows, like a imagined or lost civilization, like the sort of operation that something is going on in your practice that reminds me of science fiction writers, especially kind of more contemporary ones, like say William Gibson, in which there's like an element of estrangement, an element of taking elements that may be very much part of everyday life experience and bringing them into a completely different realm of experience by abstraction and estrangement. And I was wondering, so in a way, I guess what I wanted to say is that there's like an inversion, like there's like a sense of kind of getting farther away as an ethos, as an artistic strategy. And I wanted to ask you about that. What do you think is happening there, and why, and how, and if you would like to expand on this idea of distance and your relationship to those materials?
Yeah, I mean, I think on a more, I guess, like a really a basic understanding of, for me, I just find it really, it's not of interest of me to create work and to talk about Libyan history in the sense of kind of being like, hi, I am Libyan and this is ABC. I think it's like the least interesting thing I could do, because I think also just from my positioning, you know, like I was born in Scotland and I kind of grew up in the UK with very limited access to Libya. So it would either way be very disingenuous if I would take from voices that really had a real richness to their voices, and it just didn't think it would work right. So I think that's why, for me, it's really more interesting to kind of see what parallels can be found in, you know, I think the real kind of explanation would be that I think just with the way I work, I guess with my research methodology and the way I create things is, I really leave enough room for these things to kind of sit with each other, to kind of form chain links between ideas, and, you know, and kind of being able to view things in a more, well, not even view things, but being able to introduce certain axes to Libya, like whether it's, you know, I think usually a lot of the times artists that engage with history of any kind, there's the axis of time and the axis of like when, and I think for me it's really interesting to introduce like this other axes that kind of completely like shifts things, completely like turns things on their heads, because I do truly believe that with, you know, I think, or with, you know, with the reference of fan fiction, there's almost, I think I really enjoy dressing up with different research, you know, like thinking about what people like, I don't know, what certain philosophers from like the 20th century would talk about. How would they interpret this historical event, this conscription of utilizing water as a means of political agenda? Like, I'm interested in knowing what those people have to say, but obviously most of those people are dead and also have certain problematic views I wouldn't want to engage in. So being in the position I'm in, it's really just about thinking what could or what if. I think that's what allows the work to kind of produce this hieroglyphic or this kind of fragmentation of things kind of being like, you know, I think in just the last summer, I played a game called Animal Crossing, which is a game that it's essentially like a world building game. You're like a cute little person and you build this you build this island and you attract tourists to come live there, and you kind of build the momentum of the island. But you know, the elements within that game I found so fascinating because I saw the parallels between, I guess, the way I work, which is ideas of terraforming, ideas of world building, ideas of kind of creating things, but also creating stuff with no limit. You know, like being able to instantly do things is such a big interest to me. So I usually use certain resources. So like YouTube is really like a search engine for me. If I can find at least a 2-minute video breaking down a really dense philosophy idea, I will. And I won't go any further. There's no way that I'm reading a book about something if I just want to know like a teensy part of it. So I think that's maybe why the work has that fragmentation, but also has that, you know, I think what glues it all together is really just the commitment to trying to make sense of it, but not by giving up if it doesn't make sense, but by really forcing it to make sense. So I think I think in a way that's maybe why the work lends itself to this kind of, or it kind of has that distance from Libya as a source, because I think the source really isn't this historical event or being Libyan, or, you know, that, because that's me. I don't think I'm the source of the work. I'm interested in being that witness, but also understanding the other possible witnesses, whether they are other people, they are materials, there are fictional entities. I'm interested in kind of creating a space where all these things can exist in harmony without any hierarchy, without no kind of this overruling idea of that this has all been referenced from like philosophy 101, but that it's actually something that's been kind of influenced by many factors. Because I truly think that's what history is. It's a moment that's influenced by so many things. So the idea of kind of creating something in reference to history, I think has to play into that, has to be 101 things at once. It can't just be this one singular linear timeline. Because I think, you know, I think with my understanding of history, you know, in education, you are taught history through a timeline, through this kind of linear straight line that goes left to right. When I think history is like, it's a different shape. I think my work's trying to understand what that shape is, or what kind of form that takes. And so, yeah, that's the long answer. Short answer is, yeah.
I guess somehow, like, something that kind of your intervention kind of brought to mind immediately is that actually what makes your approach very, very interesting, I think, is that even though your primary material in some cases might be history, your work is actually about something like myth or legend, rather. I don't know what's the word exactly, but it's certainly about some sort of kind of narrative space, which maybe is more cyclical, like in the case of myths. And even though it might kind of feed from history, it's getting into a different place. There's like a different economy to it, which I'm not sure what's that economy, but probably, yeah, myth is closer to the Animal Crossing world than history.
yeah, well, exactly. There's, you know, I think my time at Gasworks, it just really gave me a lot of time to really knuckle down with some research and kind of get to the bottom. Because I think a lot of the time I was just kind of like sailing through, being like, Animal Crossing, ha ha ha. But then I had to realize, like, what was it, or what was the element that was there. I think the kind of thing that really struck me was, so within the game, you have a museum that you have to upkeep by donating fossils that you find, and then when you reach a certain level within the game, you get to sell artwork or produce artwork that kind of can be shown in like a historical context. And there's a piece of work that you can buy, which is this kind of ancient artifact, and then you go and you buy it, and then when you sell it, the museum owner kind of tells you it's fake. This artifact is fake and not real, so you can't use it. But within the game, kind of like the plot twist is that the artifact is actually a real thing, and at night it kind of illuminates and glows, and it's like very spiritual in a way. And I think, you know, just moments like that, I'm really interested in. I'm kind of interested in those, in some ways like a bit silly, but I'm interested in how that space can hold a lot of information in such a playful manner that doesn't have to be, because I think a lot of the times, you know, I don't think the questions that I ask in my work are difficult to get the answers for. I think, you know, there's probably someone that's kind of dedicated their life to understanding what a moment is and how to sustain it. But I just think that lends itself to these kind of realms of academia. And I think in Western education, those I think academia is a pretty bad thing, really. It isolates a lot of communities through its language, through its way of teachings, and inherently sometimes becomes rather tied within white supremacy and racist attitudes. So I think, to me, it's all about trying to avoid following the steps of that kind of educational system in a way that can be seen rather difficult or rather
alienating.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of, because I think a lot of the times maybe the way I work can kind of be seen as a bit condescending to kind of reference cartoons, but then also like history. But in a way, it's about it's all part of the research of how do you kind of conduct research in this kind of new space that there's no kind of it doesn't share any tethers to kind of what we know of education and what we know of spreading
if I can interject there, because that actually brings me to the last question that I wanted to pose to both of you, actually, which has to do previously, Tawfiq, you had mentioned that you felt kind of somehow interpolated or identified with something that is part of the statement that the artist we're currently exhibiting at Gasworks Mercedes Azpilicueta has like as a definition of herself as a practitioner, which is she calls herself a dishonest researcher. And you, Tawfiq, had mentioned how somehow this idea of being a lazy researcher felt like kind of something that resonated with your practice. And from my kind of perspective as a curator working with artists that very often engage with histories, I think that very, very often some of the most kind of successful, eccentric, somehow kind of counterintuitive approaches to history happen in moments in which whatever is the level of kind of rigor and formal kind of language in terms of approaching histories as an artist, there's always like a moment of slippage, I guess, or an attitude of disrespect towards kind of academia, as you were saying, that sometimes can be very, very productive. And in the case of your practice specifically, that relates, as you were just saying, with humor, with irony, with kind of a sense of lightness. But at the same time, that sense of lightness, I guess it's also a privilege in a way. Like sometimes we do have the privilege of speaking about something lightly, and sometimes we do not. And those kind of circumstances changes a lot depending on where we are and what we're experiencing. And I think both of you in very different ways, like your work kind of crosses this question about historical responsibility and what's our responsibility or your responsibility as artists or kind of authors who enunciate towards both the people that is impacted by some of the questions we're addressing, or that kind of own the materials you are kind of referencing in your case, Tawfiq, or in the case of Alessandra, the voices that you are kind of invoking within your moving image works through primary sources, texts, audio, testimonies. And yeah, I kind of would like to kind of open that question to both of you actually, and see if you would like to say a few things about how you deal with questions of historical responsibility, I guess, and care towards the materials you are kind of addressing.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess with, it's very important to kind of highlight that privilege that's within my practice and within the way I work, because it really is an element of privilege to be able to kind of go about these histories almost kind of untouched in a way, even though there are some kind of undercurrents of maybe like traumas or whatever within the kind of events that I talk about. But I think I always kind of make sure it's clear that I think also I guess the reason why I feel comfortable being able to be in that position of not being super involved in that history, or being super involved as a maker that doesn't really make work about being Libyan. I think that's kind of the reason why I maybe find it so easy to kind of reference Libya, really not half-heartedly, but with ease, being able to kind of allow other elements to kind of override that. And I think in a way, I'm kind of in that, I don't know, I think that's maybe something that I still think about historical responsibility, and in a way. And I think because on a good day, I would probably, on a good day, I'd be able to say, I mean, I'm not tied to it because it's not my like point of reference. But I guess on other days when I have to think about what these, or I guess because in a way, the way I make work is at a level where I really enjoy the kind of mechanics of it, and I enjoy that through those mechanics of thinking, systems can be produced and systems that can be utilized by other practitioners or other people in a way of thinking. But it's difficult because there are some histories that can't be treated the way that I treat this history, and kind of understanding that although the histories that I work with aren't super niche, they're still unique in a way that the language can't be used for, or the kind of mechanics of it can't be used for someone else's position with their history. So I think that's more so the side that I lead on when thinking about historical responsibility, and understanding that I can't provide this kind of work and expect it to be something that can be negotiable with someone else. I have to kind of make it clear that it's rather unique in its way, but hopefully the goal is to try find a way in which these kind of conversations can be had with other histories and whatnot. But yeah, good question.
Yeah. Hi. Well, yeah, for me, I think the question is very much, I mean, all my work thinks about historical responsibility in one way or another. Some works are very much about that, like the last piece I made late 2020, which is titled My Heritage with a question mark, and is very much about thinking also as my heritage and historical responsibility as an Italian abroad, as a migrant, and given that Italy had such a wide diaspora, and actually the biggest diaspora of the 20th century. We're talking about 26 million people just in the first part of the 20th century. So, so that also is for me something that I feel I problematize at times through certain project and work, and in a way I look and at the world and what it means for me, again, as an insider, outsider, Italian abroad, to ask these kind of questions and to very much think about Italian foreign politics, because I think this is what my work very much is about, is always thinking about foreign politics and policies as well. And so, and those intertwining of perhaps fascistizations of Italians abroad and the colonial expansion, and how all those kind of drives and aspirations then have been building up what we now, assume quite lightly as, Italian identity, or Italianness. But at the same time, so for me, it's very important to be very clear and almost at the point of being didactic at times in certain works, because of of how little reference there is in Italy in understanding this kind of histories. So it's very dangerous for me to leave things open, if that openness leads to reading that is nostalgic and and justifies and legitimizes a sort of colonial and fascist gaze, which is very much alive and well and is unchallenged, is the kind of idea of thinking through borrowing from Anne-Laura Stoller, this idea of colonial aphasia. So this idea that it's not that the references aren't there, they are there, they've always been there, but Italian people are missing the tools to recognize it and the language to articulate that. So if I am conscious of that, then I have to be very careful in the way I treat these elements and I put them in the world, so that you don't want and how you manipulate that space where you can still have a place for different links to arise, a viewer to bring their own understanding of things, but also guide it so quite surgically almost, so that you're not ending up kind of opening up to another kind of position and understanding of the work. And I think I've seen that happening quite often in Italy when, for instance, to do with certain kind of, fascism, for instance, to me as well, when we're looking at fascist heritage and especially built heritage, which is very fascinating, of almost or kind of seductive. So how do I, even in the way I use images, beside, for instance, the kind of question I ask myself when, of course, I look at colonial images of violence, really, or images that might not, manifest violence, like, a colonial postcard of a landscape, but are part of a system of violence and a gaze, certain kind of gaze, but also how I relate, when I'm, for instance, addressing certain kind of heritage that is aesthetic, and that because fascism was very much an aesthetic project, and a lot of what's happened in Italy as well is a way of sanitizing that and looking at, kind of art history almost detached from its ideological roots and drive. And so so that there are some of the layers that things that I think about when I really interrogate the kind of material I work, and I work with always found material pretty much. So I do not, create imagery or work with fiction or so on. I do very much in a very essayistic sort of, approach, but reflect on found material and trying to deconstruct that.
I think in a sense, what you said makes a lot of sense in relation to your practice, like watching sight and scene. It made me think, of lots of different kind of filmmakers and authors, but one of them certainly was Chris Marker. And just what you were saying now makes me think of how he would used to say that filmmaking practice for him was about kind of reweaving the weave of time, and that sense that both colonial histories and capitalism had somehow kind of disassembled our perception of history. And for him as a filmmaker was very important to kind of weave that together again, so that somehow things kind of didn't lose their meaning, as you were saying in the case of, say, art histories, and the way kind of the tradition of Italian fascist architecture could be easily romanticized, losing sight of what ties it together to a particular history, which I think is what made this event today also very much interesting. This idea of how different artistic approaches can weave together layers of time. And I don't know to what extent, time-wise, we are very much on our limit. So I don't know if there are any questions that have been.
No, Sabelle, there are no questions so far on YouTube.
I think this could be kind of I don't know, unless Tawfiq has kind of any question to Alessandra to Tawfiq, anything that kind of you would to like to bring onto the table. This could be a quite kind of natural conclusion to the event.
Well, I have a proposition, which would be to actually have a follow-up to this, where we are not talking about Libya from afar, but we are having, people who are involved and can bring a different kind of perspective, and, sort of creating the place for that kind of conversation to happen.
That'd be fantastic, actually.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Then we need
I make people work. Sorry, I just
no. I think we need to start working on that. That sounds like a great idea. Absolutely. Okay, should we say bye to our viewers? And I don't know to what extent anyone from the kind of School of Waters was planning to kind of reconnect for the kind of closure of the event, or should we just do that directly?
I'm reconnecting remotely just to thank you, all of you, and to really thank all the voices of this conversation, because I have the impression that you really went in super deep conversations, even if it's in very short time, and also bringing up different methodologies of digging into histories at plural, and also responding to, in a way, my provocation of the beginning, saying that looking at the Mediterranean is primarily looking at conflictual histories and histories of mutual rebellion. So thank you very much for for this talk. And School of Waters is continuing actually this digital swamp until the end of this weekend. We will have the live streaming of Madison Beecroft performance that happened actually in San Marino live in the physical events last week. And we really hope to welcome you in flesh in San Marino during summer.
Hopefully we can travel there. I'd love to go there. And thanks everyone. Thanks Simone. Thanks to the organization of School of Waters, and of course thanks to Alessandra and Tofik. It's been such a pleasure to be in conversation with both of you today. And hopefully there will be chances to kind of, as Alessandra was just suggesting, to reopen this conversation soon enough. And thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.